The universe has a way of arranging meetings not by convenience but by contradiction, and the collision of Banner's tragedy and Lobo's carnival of violence was one of those cosmic ironies that made stars pause in their orbits to listen. Bruce Banner carried the slow, patient calculus of a man who had learned the cost of power, equations written in hospital sheets, apologies, the brittle geometry of promises that could not hold when something deep and green answered pain with an earthquake. The Hulk, by contrast, was not a beast of cruelty, but a force of honest reaction, a primeval physics, stimulus, surge, response, rage as raw physics, escalating and impartial. Lobo carried a different ledger. He was an outlaw poet of brutality, a creature whose existence was an affront to consequence, banned from both heaven and hell and therefore free from the moral arithmetic that ties souls to endings. Where Hulk was potential, an unspent avalanche waiting for a slope, Lobo was practice, a man who had spent millennia polishing a smile with other people's bones. To stage these two against one another, you must first ask a question that sounds academic until the fists start moving. What does it mean to win? Is victory a terminal fact, the cessation of one life, or is it an assertion of meaning, a reordering of possibility that persists after the smoke clears? The philosophical axis of the coming battle pivots on that very hint. Lobo insists on the permanence of his own narrative. He survives, returns, jokes about it, and so his story is circular and defiant. Hulk insists, in his wordless way, on transformation. Anger is the seed of change, the instrument by which impossibilities are revived. You can read them as metaphors, immortality as the refusal to learn, rage as the capacity to alter. But in the terms of the scrap that will come, those metaphors are engines. Their histories matter because feats are not merely trophies. They are hypotheses about what power does when unopposed. Lobo's ledger is full of wild public entries, Kryptonian-level strength that can snatch moons like pebbles, a metabolism that treats gravitic dismemberment like a minor inconvenience, a regenerative law so perverse that a drop of his blood can sprout an army of Lobos if someone writes the story that way. He traffics in spectacle and entropy and wears death as a costume. Hulk's ledger is a catalogue of escalation, punches that bend continents, survival through nuclear storms, a physiology that shares its rule with a single brutal theorem: more rage equals more strength. Where Lobo's immortality is a stasis, return, repeat, the Hulk's power is directional. It accumulates, it learns only in the physics of hurt. If one must adjudicate between a man who cannot die and a force that cannot be contained, the adjudication will be less about absolutes and more about trajectory. Imagine two rivers, one loops back into a basin and runs the same course forever. The other grows into a flood after a mountain shift and remakes the valley. Lobo is the basin, Hulk the rising flood. This has consequence. Lobo's immunity to final death negates assassination as a strategy. He will not be erased by blade, blast or ritual. But immortality does not immunize against humiliation, control, or irreversible reshaping of circumstance. Hulk's escalation can, given time and provocation, change the very geometry that sustains Lobo's theatrics. A world smashed beyond recovery insists on new stories. Beyond metaphors, the pragmatic balance is thorny. If Lobo can multiply the battlefield by bleeding into clones, he can complicate the Hulk's attention and possibly drown Banner's fragile rationality in a sea of false Lobo. If Lobo's cunning weaponry and experience as a cosmic bounty hunter and barroom tactician can target Banner's humanity, he may starve the Hulk of the narrative fuel he needs to ascend. Yet Banner has one advantage often underappreciated. His intelligence is not a liability but a few. Banner learns thresholds. He knows when containment fails, when escalation is necessary, when the angry answer must be allowed to speak. The Hulk, though instinctive, is not blind. Each surge is a calibration based on the world's response. The wager that will be settled is whether a force that learns only by growing can so overwhelm the cycles of an immortal prankster that the latter's immortality becomes irrelevant to practical victory. If victory is understood as the imposition of a new, persistent order, if to win is to leave your opponent subdued, broken and unable to continue the fight for an era, then Hulk's potential for exponential increase is a lever of cosmic leverage. If victory is merely survival, if existence eternally returns with a grin, then Lobo never truly loses. The philosophical debate thus becomes a testable prophecy. Can escalation produce permanence? Can change outlast endurance? The universe will answer by smashing these answers into one another until something gives. In the interludes before violence, they will circle one another like planets, Banner's mournful restraint clashing with Lobo's careless grit. Each conversation will be an arm wrestle of metaphysics, Hulk's silent insistence that power should have consequences, Lobo's incandescent refusal to accept consequence as anything but a joke. Friends of Banner will whisper about responsibility and restraint. Patrons of chaos will laugh about the futility of care. It is a debate bruised in the mouth and argued with fists. Both men are right in their axioms. Both have champions in the star. Both will be tested in the hard currency of bone and sound. When the first blow lands, it will not merely register as a hit. It will be the proof of a thesis, the empirical experiment that has been waiting since creation to be performed. They met where things went to die and be reborn. A fractured system of asteroids, carved from a dead world that had once been called a moon, a place where gravity forgot how to be polite. The sound of their arrival was not thunder, but a wrongness that made comets shudder. Lobo arrived with his hook slung over one shoulder, a cigar burning like a small rebellion, boots scuffing cosmic dust as if the universe were a bar, and he merely stepped in for a drink. He grinned into his helmet's visor and spat a curse at the emptiness, because violence was his native language, and the empty space was an excellent place to practice. Banner arrived in a different rhythm, a pale figure folded into himself, eyes that had carried 1,000 confessions, the slow, deliberate gait of a man who had made a bargain with restraint and found the contract fragile. They measured each other with the brief, terrible courtesy of beings who understood the stakes. Lobo spoke first, a laugh that could have been a gunshot. "You green," he said. "You ugly. Let's dance." Banner said nothing. The breath left him like a shutter slamming. It was all the signal the Hulk needed. The transformation was geological, clothes shredded, muscles knitting into impossible architecture, a head that did not think so much as decree. Where Banner was calculus, the Hulk was theorem, sudden and inevitable. Their first contact imprinted the asteroid belt like a handwriting sample. Lobo swung with the arrogance of an executioner, his fist cracked like a meteor. The blow landed, and the Hulk stumbled, because Lobo's proficiency was no urban myth. He hit like a planet and smiled at the way the Hulk's teeth clicked. Lobo's equipment was not merely show. Matter guns that chewed at density, chains that wanted to unmake bones, a savagery honed by centuries of bounties. He delighted in improvisation, in the small cruelties that took victories from the realm of power and put them into the realm of performance. The Hulk, however, was an accumulation. He took the hit and answered with the first of many punches that did not merely move Lobo. They demanded proof that the cosmos had been paid attention to. The asteroid itself wavered, mass rearranged. A small moon shifted on its axis. Lobo laughed as fragments of rubble embedded in his scarred flesh and then spun into a blasphemous form of regeneration. Blood that should have been ruin stitched itself back into grin. He shed a drop that slipped into damp stone and split into 2 Lobos, then 3. The air filled with cursing duplicates, each a mirror with a different weapon, each a joke told with knives. For a moment it looked as though multicolation would be decisive. Lobos swarmed like vermin. They were coordinated by a mind honed in war, their strategies mercenary and cruel. Their aim was to scatter attention, to force Banner to dilute his fury into many small, manageable rages that would never reach the pitch where physical laws began to bend. But rage does not distribute politely. It is a contagion and a summon. With every Lobo's stabbed grin, something in Banner's chest answered. Memory flared, mother's hands, the smell of lab solvents, the first time radiation hummed through cartilage and made a promise. And from memory the Hulk roared the world into a new equation. He began to grow not in size only but in insistence. His shockwave ceased to be local and became a geometric argument. He cracked more than stone. He cracked expectation. Each strike became a calculus for annihilation and reconstruction. Lobo clones were smashed into stardust, and their shattered pieces could not coherently reweave fast enough to be more than a slow, infuriating irritation. Lobo adapted. He pulled the fight outward, hurling the Hulk through asteroid rings, dragging him across miles of vacuum, pulling cities of ice from dead worlds to use as improvised ammunition. He read the battlefield like a gambler, betting on momentum and surprise rather than escalation. He found the weaknesses in the Hulk's social wiring, Banner's flashes of conscience, questions of collateral damage, and he spat them in a taunt meant to starve the green giant of his center. The tactic was clever enough to wound. It caused the Hulk to falter on the edge of self-control, to flicker between reason and obliteration. But the Hulk's nature is not only reaction, it is accumulation. Each emotional blow sowed strength rather than ruin. Anger fed, and with every fed anger the physics of his body remapped. Where Lobo carved, Hulk filled. Where Lobo laughed, Hulk answered with silence that trembled with fear. The battle escalated into things that fiction had no good adjectives for. Tidal pulses that rearranged orbits, punches that folded time's surface so briefly that light stumbled, roars that felt like tectonics negotiating with the sky. Lobo found himself slammed into planetary cores, only to peel himself apart and crawl back into something that could be remade. He laughed because the joke was old and durable. He grinned because pain was a toy. But there is a difference between being indestructible and being meaningful. Immortality is a loop. Meaning is an arrow. The Hulk's blows began to change the very arena. The asteroid belt compressed into a ring that could no longer support the extravagance of Lobo's regenerations. Gravity itself changed sign in small pockets. Matter that had served as scaffolding for clones fell into black powder. At a certain point, Lobo's cloning ceased to be a multicolation and became a cannibalistic echo. The Lobos that reformed lacked coherence, missing the improvisational cruelty that had made Lobo dangerous. They were angry, yes, but not Lobo at full stride. Desperation crept into the mercenary's grip. He reached for escalation of his own weapons that flung shards of broken suns, a scream that turned sound into corrosive geometry. But Hulk's arc had become a force that transformed threat into precedent. The final sequence was not cinematic so much as inevitable. Hulk gathered motion like a storm, a single fist becoming an edict. He did not aim to kill in the sense Lobo would find interesting. He aimed to end the fight on terms that could be enforced. The fist connected and the universe remembered the hit. Lobo was pulverized, unmade with a clinical absence of fanfare. And then he reassembled, because his fetishes of immortality would not allow otherwise. But when he reassembled, there was something different in him. The smugness had been stripped by a force that refused his jokes. He had come back to a quiet that felt like a sentence. He could not die, for the record he would not. But something irreducible had been taken. The field of action that allowed him to treat existence as an endless punchline had been closed off. He awoke in a shell of smoke and bias, wounded in the way only meaning can wound. Lobo felt the weight of consequence for perhaps the first time in a long, long while. He spat and he cursed and he bared his teeth. But the teeth did not cut the world the way they had before. Hulk stood over him, breathing like a planet, battered, monstrous, and precise. He had not erased Lobo's immortality. He had done something that in the ledger of cosmic fights was often more decisive. He had imposed a long-term incapacity. Lobo would live and he would return, but the battle had established a factor that would persist. When the world needed to be remade, the Hulk could make it so at a scale that rendered Lobo's defiance tactically irrelevant. The philosophy that had driven Banner into self-denial and then into the green architecture of pure response had been vindicated in muscle and consequence. Change, when relentless and calibrated by intelligence, outlasts stubborn recurrence. The universe acknowledged the verdict in silence. Comets resumed their courses. The asteroid belt settled into a new geometry, and Lobo, for all his curses, slunk away with a bruise that read like a lesson. The winner had not sought theatricality. He had sought a new order. Hulk had won the fight, and in doing so had written a new line into both their stories. Lobo would grin again perhaps, and someday the galactic joke would be on some other fool. But the record of that day was clear. Hulk stood with the air of a thing that had done the work of making consequence real. The victory was not the death of an enemy. It was the imposition of a reality in which that enemy's signature no longer guaranteed the same outcome. Hulk had won, and the universe, tired and sensible, nodded and moved on.